In November 1996, Steve Coppell did something almost unheard of in professional football. After just 33 days as manager of Manchester City, he walked into a press conference looking pale and exhausted, his voice cracking with emotion, and resigned. But this wasn't a typical managerial sacking or a scandal. Coppell told the truth. He admitted he was overwhelmed by stress and couldn't function in the job anymore. In the tough, silent world of 1990s football, where managers were expected to be hard and unbreakable, this confession was revolutionary. What happened during those 33 days? And why does Steve Coppell's story matter more than ever today? Steve Coppell wasn't just any manager. Before Manchester City, he had built one of the most impressive careers in English football. As a player, he won the FA Cup with Manchester United in 1997 and even represented England at the World Cup. A knee injury ended his playing days early, but Coppell was smart. He had studied economics at the University of Liverpool and brought that analytical mind into management. In 1984, at just 28 years old, he became the youngest manager in the league when he took over Crystal Palace. What he did there over the next 9 years was remarkable. He transformed Palace from a struggling second-tier club into a competitive top-flight team, all while working with barely any money. He took them to third place in the league, their highest finish ever, and to the FA Cup final in 1990. One of his best decisions was signing Ian Wright from non-league football. Wright went on to become an international star. Coppell's success was built on patience and control. He needed time to implement his ideas, to rebuild teams gradually with careful planning. He even described himself as an animal who tends to roost wherever he stays, pointing to his 9-year spells at both Manchester United as a player and Crystal Palace as a manager. This was a man who thrived in stable, long-term environments where he could build something brick by brick. But Manchester City in 1996 was the complete opposite of stable. When Coppell arrived at Manchester City on October 7, 1996, he walked into chaos. The club had been without a manager for 6 weeks after the disastrous reign of Alan Ball. They were stuck in 14th place in the Championship, the second tier of English football. The club had a sickly feeling about it. Former Crystal Palace chairman Ron Nodes later said he was surprised at how much it took out of Coppell, suggesting the club was just too enormous for him to handle. The problems went deeper than league position. The squad was a mess. There were 54 professional players on the books, all brought in by different managers with different ideas. Imagine trying to coach a team where nobody really fit together. Coppell wasn't just managing a football team. He was battling internal politics, financial problems, and massive pressure from fans who expected immediate results. The organisational stress was crushing. And then there was the media. The mid-1990s was when English football exploded commercially. The Premier League was bringing huge money and attention to the sport. Every game was hyped into a 4-day event. For a quiet, naturally thoughtful manager like Coppell, this constant spotlight was hostile. He found the intensity far more extreme than anything he had experienced before. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what you think made Coppell different from other managers of his era. Your engagement really helps the channel grow. Coppell managed just 6 games before everything fell apart. The results were poor. City lost 2-0 at Reading in a match where they had a player sent off. The team was floundering in 17th position, but it wasn't the results alone that broke him. It was the weight of everything combined, the massive disorganised squad, the expectation to fix years of problems in weeks, the media examining every decision, and his own high standards all crashed down at once. When Coppell arrived at City, he had said this was going to be a very long job, that you have to look ahead beyond this season. He fundamentally misunderstood what was required, or maybe he understood perfectly and realised he couldn't do it. Either way, the gap between his methodical, analytical approach and the immediate crisis management needed was too wide. His assistant Phil Neal had no idea what was coming. When Coppell told him he was resigning, Neal responded with one word: "What?" The deterioration had been rapid and mostly invisible, all happening inside Coppell's head until he reached the breaking point. At his final press conference on November 8, 1996, Coppell looked drawn and pale. His voice cracked as he made his statement. "I am not ashamed to admit I have suffered for some time from the huge pressure I have imposed on myself. Since my appointment, this has completely overwhelmed me to such an extent that I cannot function in the job the way I would like to. The situation is affecting my well-being. I am resigning on medical advice and solely for personal reasons." To understand how groundbreaking this was, you need to understand football culture in 1996. Academics who study the sport describe it as a harsh, unsupportive psychological environment with strong expectations of manliness. There was a culture of silence around personal difficulties. Managers were supposed to be disciplined, focused, and unbreakable. Admitting mental struggle was seen as weakness. Coppell strategically framed his resignation in medical terms, saying he had consulted doctors. This was crucial. In 1996, psychological collapse could only be accepted if it was presented as a verifiable medical condition requiring clinical treatment. He needed that medical shield to legitimize his decision. This tactic would later influence how mental health is discussed in sports, as a serious condition requiring professional help. But even with medical framing, people didn't understand the suddenness of the resignation and his physical appearance. He looked thin and exhausted, left a vacuum that rumours rushed to fill. Lurid and unfounded speculations circulated. Some thought he had AIDS. Others spread rumours about his sexual orientation, including a supposed gay love affair with a player. None of this was true. There was not a single scrap of evidence for any of it. These rumours reveal something important. In the 1990s, rapid, unexplained physical decline was often linked to highly stigmatized conditions like AIDS. Issues of sexuality were taboo in football. The public simply could not process the honest truth that severe psychological stress was a debilitating condition on its own. They needed some other explanation, something more dramatic or scandalous. The 33 days at Manchester City could have ended Steve Coppell's career. Instead, they marked the beginning of something else. A conscious shift towards self-preservation and a validation that the failure was about the environment, not about him. Coppell immediately returned to Crystal Palace, the place he knew as a refuge. He started as chief scout, a lower-pressure role that let him recover and take stock. In February 1997, he became manager again for his third spell at the club. This staged return was deliberate and careful. Years later, the lasting impact of the City experience became clear. When Coppell was being considered for the Reading job, the League Managers Association organised a stress test. The results came back abnormal. The City trauma had left him with a chronic vulnerability to stress, made worse by the recent death of his brother. Coppell now knew he needed to manage his mental health proactively for the rest of his career. His most successful period came at Reading between 2003 and 2009. This was the anti-City model. Reading was smaller, more stable, and gave him time. He replicated everything that worked at Crystal Palace. In the 2005 to 2006 season, he led Reading to the Championship title with a record-breaking 106 points and a 33-game unbeaten run. Then he took them to an impressive 8th-place finish in their first-ever Premier League season. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of football's most misunderstood stories, show some love by hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. This success validated everything. The Manchester City failure was not because Coppell couldn't manage. It was because the environment was toxic and chaotic. In the right conditions, with time and stability, he was brilliant. He consciously chose smaller, less visible clubs after City, rejecting the hype and publicity that had overwhelmed him. The trauma also shaped his management style permanently. He became known as the calmest man in English football. His preparation was detailed to the point of being fastidious. When he addressed players, he used calm logic rather than emotional confrontation. This reduced stress for himself and his team. He avoided the excesses and media circus of modern football deliberately. It was self-preservation through self-awareness. Over his career, Coppell managed over 1,000 matches. That longevity fundamentally contradicts any narrative that the 33-day resignation showed professional weakness. Instead, it showed strength, the strength to recognize when something was damaging him and to walk away. Today, mental health experts look back at Coppell's decision with admiration. They praise the strength of character it took to embrace vulnerability in such a competitive, masculine industry. His honesty about being overwhelmed was groundbreaking. It challenged the stereotype of the invulnerable manager who never admits struggle. Coppell's experience highlighted a dangerous gap, the gap between what institutions expect from people and what those people can actually handle psychologically, especially in chaotic, high-pressure environments with intense media scrutiny. By publicly linking his resignation to health and stress, he helped pave the way for a more open approach to mental health in sports. The lessons from those 33 days are still relevant. They show the necessity of recognizing debilitating stress and acting on it. They inform the development of mandatory welfare and support programs for managers and staff operating under extreme pressure. Coppell's story provides historical evidence that self-awareness, leading to the conscious avoidance of toxic environments, is the highest form of resilience. Steve Coppell's legacy is not defined by 33 days of failure. It is defined by decades of success, by the courage to admit when something was wrong, and by the wisdom to choose environments where he could thrive. He showed that walking away is not giving up. Sometimes it is the bravest thing you can do. In a sport that demands toughness, Coppell redefined what toughness really means. It means knowing yourself, protecting your well-being, and having the courage to be honest about your limits. That is a lesson football is still learning today.